Alright, we're going to talk about the Lake Saunders development proposal that's going to the Tavares Planning and Zoning Committee meeting on April 18th at 3 p.m. Now, at the earlier Tavares meeting on April 3rd, some citizens wanted to give public comment about this proposal, which is to build, let's look at the area here first. This is Lake Saunders. They got a lot of different types of, mostly like mobile homes, you know, and around there, retirement communities. There's David Walker Drive. Okay, so, and then here's U.S. Highway 441, the old one. It comes through Tavares and is heading this way towards Mount Dora. That's where this is at. There's it. Okay, so Lake Saunders is here, and let's look at all the homes that are around them. They're all pretty tiny single-story mobile homes, trailer parks. They've been there many years. Hibiscus mobile home community. There's another one. And here's some apartments up here. Lake Receptions, by the way, is up here. So when you go to Lake Receptions, you know, off on Highway 19A, it's looking out over Lake Saunders. So anyway, down here on down here along the highway, old U.S. Highway 441, there's this company that wants to take this area right there, in between, I'm going to move this out a little bit, okay, in between, these are commercial buildings. This is the vacant lot, this right there. They want to take that and put multi-story apartment buildings in there. One is that normally in zoning and land use changes, you always stick with what's around you, and there's no multi-story buildings anywhere around them. These are all single-story, single-family homes. And so the neighbors have come unglued, the ones that live probably along here, the lady that lives right in this narrow lot that moves up and down here, probably some people over here, maybe over here. And usually there's two issues. One is that it brings a lot more traffic to the road, which it would, and that it violates the density of the existing neighborhood. In this case, it'd be multiple story, which those aren't. And so the neighbors are very concerned about it, and that's what's coming up. So I just wanted to show you. Over here is Lake Francis, and down here is Lake Tavares, and right down here is Main Street and Wooten Park in Tavares, Tavares City Hall, Lake Dora Drive, and up there it says East Alfred Street. That is also old U.S. Highway 441, so going over there, and that's where it's at. And by the way, this area right here is actually not in Tavares yet. That is actually Lake County. It's between Mount Dora, which is over to the right, and Tavares, which is over here. And so the request is to also annex into the city, and it's a non-contiguous annexation. Normally when you have annexation, the old rules used to be that you could only expand, the city could only approve annexation into county areas that were contiguous to the existing city boundaries. But this is, then they changed the rules a couple years ago, in the state, and they allow non-contiguous annexation. The developers usually do this because they want to get the city water and the city sewer systems. So they're going to have to run a pipeline all the way down here from where it is in Tavares. Going to have to, and Tavares' border is probably right around here. They have to run it down there. There's already a, let's see, I'm looking, okay, there's Shantiniketan. Right next to it is Three Palms. It's a mobile home park. That was in the Lake County. The owner did get the city to annex it, and he has to pay for the water line going up that far, but he never did because he couldn't get funding for the multi-story building he wanted to put in there. So the mobile home park, Three Palms, is still there. And so anyway, they would have to run the city's sewer lines and water lines all the way down here, because these properties here are all most likely on both wells for their water, and they're on they've got septic tanks as opposed to sewer lines. And so that's what developers want. They always want the sewer lines, and that's what drives a lot of this annexation. So this will create what's called an enclave, which means that the approval, if it happens right there, that would be the city of Tavares, but this is still a county. And then over here is the city. And then you have all sorts of issues related to, okay, which police department shows up, which fire department shows up. The fire department's kind of worked that out between like the city fire department and the county, and they invoice each other if they go into another area that's closest. But with the sheriff would be in the county, and the Tavares police would be over here. But if this is the city of Tavares, I don't know whether they'll have to work out whether they call the city of Tavares police, or they're gonna only the sheriff comes over here, but then does it in some sort of cooperative deal and gets reimbursed for the times they go there. And that's why enclaves are really kind of screwed up. And if we looked at an official map of Tavares, for instance, or even North Eustis, you'd see all sorts of enclaves. You'd see where parts of the city wrap around some county areas where they would not vote to become part of the city, and because they don't want to pay the taxes. They don't want to be on the sewer line, maybe because they don't want to pay the city water costs, because city taxes and quote services are always higher than what the county has, and so a lot of people don't want to pay those higher taxes. And Tavares is one of the higher tax cities in the county. They're at 7 mills. And so that's the issue. That's what we're going to be looking at. Okay, a little bit more on Lake Saunders. First of all, I wanted to explain the first time that the neighbors usually know that there's a rezoning, as it's called, or annexation, is that there'll be signs posted. Don't ever ignore them. This is the one for Lake Saunders. It says notice of public hearing. Now you'll notice that the nails that hold, or the staples that hold this, are to a little tiny stick. Okay, I've gone around and around with the city of Tavares about this, because what happens is if it rains or something, or there's wind, these pieces of paper they put up there, and this looks like, I can't tell if it's paper or maybe a little heavier cardboard, but they fold over and people don't see them. And then where they're placed by the developer. They're not placed by the city. And the developer might put them 10 feet, 15 feet away from the road that's going by this site, and you can't see them. And then if they're folded over, You don't know. So anytime you see a stake near your house that's got one of these, stop and read it. Because this may be, they're putting in this case, a multi-story building right next to residences. And if people ignored it, it goes to Planning and Zoning Commission. If opposition doesn't show up, the neighbors don't show up, they'll say, okay, well, the developer's asking for this, it's reasonable, and they'll approve it. And then it goes to the city council, and you'll notice that this one gives the date. It has the dates. April 18th is the Planning and Zoning meeting. Okay, you can't go to the city council before that date and talk about it, because this is what's known as a quasi-judicial hearing, and both sides have to be there. And the other side, the attorney for the developer, rarely ever shows up for anything except for the Planning and Zoning meeting, and probably maybe for the first reading. Now, okay, so it goes to the Planning and Zoning meeting. There's a dog and pony show. Anybody with public input should talk. And matter of fact, if you see this by your place, you want to mail your comments in writing to whatever address or person that they list down in the bottom. You track them down. You make sure that they got it, that they didn't lose it in their email, because I've seen all of this crap go on with these development processes. And so you have to make sure that it's in the meeting packet, so it's on record and it's in writing and it's attached in the entire packet that is given to the Planning and Zoning Committee, and later it's given to the City Council. And you want to make sure they include those in the packet, that they just don't have something that says, oh, there's 50 of them and 49 were opposed and one was for it. You want to see what people have commented on. You may not know about everybody that's making comments. Okay, so in this case we got April 18th. That's the Planning and Zoning meeting, and I got terrible focus. Okay, and then they also have these other two dates which are important: May 1st and May 15th. First reading and second reading. Tavares, to my knowledge, is the only city in Lake County that refuses to let people talk at the first reading. So, I mean, you can go, but and maybe you get up and you talk about the process. You think it's wrong, which I recommend, but you can't talk about the actual issue, the rezoning issue. Then you make sure you're at the second reading. Now, you also have to watch out like a hawk by going to the City Council website and looking for the Planning and Zoning meeting agendas, and download those and look at those. They're in PDF format on the City of Tavares website. And you also need to monitor these meetings. I would even send an email, and I would call the head of the department that's listed somewhere down here, or actually over here, because these are posted, but then there's also a required notice in the newspaper. Now the problem is they only have to post it in one newspaper. They do not have to put this on their website anywhere. So there's no like public advertisements for public notices on, at least not right now in Florida. So this one, I'm not sure. I think this is, well, let's scroll up. I've got the whole ad here, the entire page. So let's see, it's the Lake Sentinel. So it's in the Lake Sentinel on Thursday. Now, you have to know where it's published, and you don't, because they don't tell you. So, you always want to make sure they're advertised, and they'll always put in their meeting packet somewhere, they'll have a copy of this ad and say, well, we met the requirements of the state, but we didn't give a shit if you didn't read that newspaper on that day. So, I mean, I've seen too much of this. I think it's really lame that these cities hide behind it and say, well, this is what we're required to do. We're not going to do anything more. So anyway, it's the City of Tavares Notice of Public Hearing. Now there's another one next to it, but that's a different matter that will also be discussed at that planning and zoning meeting. And so here they have two ordinances that they're proposing. Okay, and so you have to read those, and they make them in full caps, which all the readership studies say that it's harder to read full caps, but that's the way the government does it. In my opinion, that it's unprofessional, but the state needs to change this and have them write it in regular text like here, so it's more readable. But anyway, so the first ordinance is where they're annexing in the property. As I mentioned before, the property is outside of the City of Tavares boundaries, so in order to get this through, first they have to annex it and say, okay, now this is part of the City of Tavares, and then secondly, then they can change the land use. So the second one is the land use change, and it says it's going to change the future land use designation of 9.85 acres from county urban high, and that's probably maybe one residence per 5 acres, unless it's because it's not zoned for like a trailer park, but single story residence and county urban high. You have to know, or you have to look up what these zoning designations mean so that you understand, because they don't explain that either. So they're saying they're changing it from county urban high to city high density residential. Okay, this is a key thing to understand. You may be in an area, and this has happened in several places in this county, where they're on like 2-acre lots with one house, or 5-acre lots with one house, or even 24 acres with one house, and they're zoned that way. Well, then along comes the developer. They go through this process. They get the city to approve annexing into the city if they're not in the city already. And typically, if it was in the city, it would already have high density. It would be like 3 units per acre. Okay, so, but instead, they don't tell you what city high density residential means. That could be 5 units per acre. It could be 15 with multiple stories. You have to understand. You got to look that up, or you got to talk to staff and get them to explain it. And so that's the key, is you're going to have to, if you really want to understand what's being done to you, if you're a neighbor in this area, you have to see the notice, know when the meetings are. You have to download the packet for the Planning and Zoning Commission and later for the City Council. You have to also read the ordinance change. Well, it's here, and it's also that top part. Those are the ordinances also. Very hard to read, aren't they? They intentionally do this. I mean, it's just my opinion. Although, orange, they should at least make those bold. That text should be bold so it's easier to read, and it should be lowercase so it's easier to read. But somewhere in the state, some lawyers decided this is the way that you do it. So we're stuck with this process. So that, you have to look at those and realize in this case there's more than one ordinance. And so they're going to try and do a double whammy. They're going to try and, vote on the annexation. They're going to prove that, which means that basically it changes from being county land to, in this case, to city land. And they're rezoning, it says up here, it's rezoning the property from county residential professional, and it says RP right there, and planned industrial district MP to city RMF3 residential multifamily. There's the key. So see, they're using different terms for each part. They're annexing, and so when they change from county to city, then you change to the city zoning systems. And all cities have higher density units. Like there was an area over by Deer Island, They're like 5 acres per lot. Well, then this one developer bought a bunch of land, 222 acres, and he wanted to annex into the city of Tavares, get their water and light, water and sewer lines, and the maximum density that the city had was 3 units per acre. So if you multiply that times 222 acres, you come up with a possible residential units of 666 on 222 acres. Now they went a lot lower, a lot of negotiations and everything, and then part of the land is not developed because it's swampland. So, but it ended up being 69 residences on the 222 acres. After a lawsuit, and the developer lost the lawsuit, and originally wanted to go 100 acres and would have had the right to go even higher in density. So you have to understand density. You have to look at these things. You have to ask, what do each of these codes mean? What does it allow? What is the maximum? Because it might say like high density residential. Well, that might be a range of several things. Okay. So now finally, the property that we're looking at, this is the map that they put in the ad. There's Lake Saunders. I've showed you this already. There's the road that they talk about, and there's the property right there. You'll notice that little kind of peninsula sticking out there, and the narrow lots of land there. Now I'm going to show you the map. So now, and it's raining outside, but there's the area right there. So that's what I wanted to explain, and so I'm signing off. Hey, this is Vance, your fiscal ranger, and I got some more on Lake Saunders. It's not raining outside, so I just wanted to say a couple things. One is that the there's another way that nearby landowners would be notified when you have a development request like this, and that is by mail, not email, but by mail. And again, this is a specified requirement, and I've seen this one screwed up too. They're supposed to, I can't quote the exact rules, I got to find that out, but you should find that out too if it affects you. Especially if you get embroiled in one of these at the beginning, you want to make sure that you are on an email list they have to send notifications as required, not email. They could add an email one, but it's the mailing. But a simple explanation is that they're supposed to email people that live next door to the affected property. And then other people have said, well, it's supposed to be within 100 feet of the property. For instance, what about people that are across the street? That's not next door. It depends on how you define it. Well, I'm not convinced that there is a really organized, thorough process for doing this. I used to work in an industry and remodeling, and we used mailing systems that, for instance, you've seen them. If you have a neighbor who's getting a new roof, well, that roofer has access to mailing systems, and they can request a direct mail postcard or whatever be mailed to all the neighbors within, and they can specify the radius, and it could be half a mile within that, and then they send you a postcard and saying, hey, I'm fixing the roof on your neighbor's house, so why don't you go look at it and call me up if you need some roofing work done. Well, that's common. That's been around a long time. But what I see is that it seems these cities just do kind of a half-ass job at making sure that they even have the mailing addresses for those. They might have to go through the property records, get the mailing addresses. The person on record may not be could be in China, and like I know that happened to one guy that in the attempt to redevelop in the Shirley Shores Deer Island area. He was off on a trip. He was out of the country, and he came back, and the only reason that he knew about this is that I had made a video of the initial public planning and zoning meeting, and he was able to learn about it, and then he had the background to organize everybody. So that's another part of it, is that, okay, you've read the sign, you've seen the ad, or you've got a mailed notice saying that this is coming up at planning and zoning. You need to organize with the other neighbors to be effective, so that you can share ideas such as what I've mentioned here in this video. But you also, what I saw in the Deer Island case is the fellow that organized that, he set up a tent right at a major intersection in the neighborhood where everybody had to drive by it. And he had big signs up there saying, sign our petition, get information on huge new development that may go in here. And so a lot of people stopped, and I was out there. I made a video actually of that going on, and they got people to sign, so that then they built up an email list. They had over 400 people on that email list, and then they used that to raise money for a lawsuit when it became clear that the city was going to approve it anyway, because there was a lot of things that were inappropriate that were done. Everything from the developer waiting till the last minute, then submitting a totally different plan of the number of units to the city offices, and then that meant that all the opposition didn't know. They'd show up at the meeting, and here's a completely new development plan that they had not had a chance to look at or anything else. They're up against an attorney who kept playing all sorts of tricks like that, and you never know. I've seen conscientious, ethical attorneys also do just the opposite. They were very clear. They went out, they met with the neighbors. Some of these developer attorneys won't meet with the neighbors. Another issue that you got to think about is keep notes. If you try and meet with somebody and they don't do it, and they won't, like for instance city council members or the staff, they send something to the wrong address, you want to keep note of all that, because you may need that in any kind of potential legal action. And you also have to have some pretty solid evidence. You can't just make opinions. You need to have solid evidence on an issue. Let's say, for instance, you claim that this new development is going to run down the value of your property. Well, then you probably need an appraisal on that, and it's signed by somebody that's certified to show that, because just hearsay saying my property is going to lose value, they call this quasi-judicial. That means rules of evidence, like you see in the courts and on TV law shows. But so they have to have the people who are making the decision can't make a decision without solid evidence. So there's a lot of things that are involved in this if you want to go to the mats and fight a proposed development. And typically it's either one that's going to cause a lot of new traffic, and then you find that the city won't pay to improve an intersection or the driveways, or they won't put in a turn lane. These things have all come up in issues related to just Tavares. And yet we got 13 other cities here, and some of this goes on in every city in Lake County. Another issue is that road is a county road. Okay, suppose they come up with a traffic study and it shows that this is going to greatly increase the number of trips going in and out if it's apartment building, and I don't know how many units will be there yet. And when that happens, you're going to have to question the traffic study that the developer is going to get. Or another thing is that the rules may say that The developer is supposed to have like environmental study, supposed to have a traffic study. Well, I've seen cases like in the Shirley Shores area again, because I followed that for 2 years, where they did not get those studies, and that they convinced the city, and they convinced the city attorney that they didn't need to, because they were just setting up to sell land and flip the land to other developers or builders to build the homes. Now, in the case of this Lake Saunders project, I don't know enough about, but you should review the track record of the developer. In the case of the Shirley Shores area, the developer there was a national firm that comes in, they develop, they get through the annexation, they get the plat in for all the lots, and then they could turn around and they could flip it to another developer who completely changes the plan. And you could be sabotaged, and you have to be on top of these guys. They play all sorts of crap. There's not a lot of ethics, in my view, in this business. And they're all out to make a buck. I'll give you an example. There's another retirement community that was on a golf course. It's off of Dead River Road. It's in Tavares, and I don't remember their name. I think it's Bay Tree. But the developer kept the rights for the golf course. Well, then he turned around and he sold the golf course to a developer to put homes on it, and all of a sudden destroyed all the views and the ability to play golf for all the people that were on these units around the golf course. And I saw that in California too, where I used to live. You could have a house that has a great view of the ocean, and it could be a $500,000 house, and then all of a sudden after you bought it, then the developer sells land, or another developer has land below it because they're on a hill, and they build a shopping center and there's no height restrictions, and they could destroy their view. This is a lot of crap. So I mean, it's dangerous to buy land next to vacant land in Lake County, or actually in Florida, or probably nationally, because unless you're on top of it, and you really know, this could happen to you. It happened in a development up in north part of Tavares. They're building it now. They came in and they proposed putting in a lot of different residences, but also a 4-story retirement building, and it was right in people's backyard of existing homes, and they would have had all those people looking out over their homes. There was no buffer, and so then they ended up having to, the residents had to scream and complain and ask the city to at least require a buffer. In that case, the developer, I think, was pretty ethical. They put in a buffer, they put in trees and everything, so you didn't have all these apartment buildings looking down into people's backyards. But you know, there can be a lot of screaming and anguish over these things. And this is what I'm trying to get across. This is a messy business. And I was a corporate internal audit manager for 20 years. I was an anti-corruption manager for 2 years in Iraq. My business is, and I reviewed contracts up to $100 million, and so I'm used to finding stuff like this or seeing it, but a lot of people can get caught dead. And so that's why I'm making this video, is you need to know this, you need to be on top, you need to organize, or you could end up having like a 4-story building right next to your back fence. If you don't argue and organize and go to meetings and talk to the city council, talk to all the people on the planning and zoning committee, and take notes if they refuse to talk to you, then when you come to a meeting, raise that issue. You also need to get contacts with the press, and with me, I run a blog, but get them in, and you got to sell the sizzle for that. You got to sell why it's wrong that this is going on. And so that's okay. This is the end of the third part, unless I think of something else. And with that, I'm signing out again.